Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Mandy Muchnick, and you're watching Difference Makers Discuss. We have over 1,600 people from 67 countries joining us today. This is the second episode in the series brought to you by Chartered Accountants Worldwide. During the series, we are taking a look at the most pressing issues facing chartered accountants and the finance and business industry at large, from diversity and inclusion to mental health, from the climate emergency to digital disruption. We're taking an unflinching look at the factors most affecting our community and, most importantly, what we can do to make it better. In order to help us navigate these topics, we're joined by a panel of speakers who are making a significant difference in their companies, their communities, and the wider world. They are our difference makers. Pre-COVID-19, we already had a silent pandemic affecting millions of people, and this has become very important to talk about. That's why we're here today to discuss mental health matters. The World Health Organization estimates that that poor mental health impacts the global economy by over $2.5 trillion a year. Businesses suffer from lack of productivity, and employees suffer from discrimination and poor belief in their abilities. We cannot forget that good health is mental health, and that this is in fact one of the Sustainable Development Goals. Today, I'm joined by three speakers who have hands-on experience in improving our attitude towards mental health. They have all worked to battle both stigma and the effects of mental health issues, and each will bring a unique perspective to the table. They are difference makers in the truest sense. Before I introduce them, we do have a couple of housekeeping notes. If you're struggling with bandwidth, please hit the settings button on the lower right-hand part of your screen and lower the resolution. We'd love to hear from you throughout today, so please use the chat function on your screen as well. We'll be heading to a roundtable, and we'd love to hear your questions and make this an interactive session. Before we get started today, we actually want to have a check-in with all of our viewers. So we're going to ask you to please take a moment and pause and let us know how you are feeling today. Please answer this. If anyone is struggling with their mental health, we really encourage you to visit the Chartered Accountants Worldwide Wellness Hub. There are ample resources available for you. If you're based in South Africa, please search the Join Panda app across all the app stores. As part of the founding team of Panda, we believe that mental health should be accessible to all. We believe that it's still largely inaccessible, and that it's inaccessible for three main reasons, being stigma, cost, and not knowing how to enter the system. We've built the app with all these key problems in mind, and we hope that you can find your community in Panda. If you're based outside of South Africa, there will be a follow-on email on how you can download the app in your country. Please let us know how you find it. And again, we really hope that you find your community with us. We really want to keep this conversation going and be part of the solution to destigmatizing mental health. So please share your key takeaways throughout the episode, and remember to hashtag difference makers and tag Chartered Accountants Worldwide. It now gives me great pleasure to finally introduce our first speaker for the day, Dee France. Dee is the wellbeing lead at Chartered Accountants Worldwide, running the Wellbeing Hub and the CA support. The Institute's financial assistance means to supporting its members and students. Dee is also the Chartered Accountants Worldwide Global Mental Fitness Task Force lead. This task force is committed to driving awareness around mental health challenges in the profession. Dee, we are so excited to have you today. Welcome to Difference Makers Discuss. You definitely have your finger on the pulse on what's happening in the profession. So please, can you talk us through the landscape a bit? Because I think often people feel like they're suffering alone, and that's a large part of the problem.
So thank you so much, Mandy, for inviting me along today. It's great to be here. I think it's testament to the amount of people that have tuned in today, 1,600 people across umpteen countries globally. So it's fantastic to see that. So I think we can all agree that we've really come through a sort of an extreme period of isolation, where our families and our friends have been separated, and we've been working from home, and we're kind of missing that camaraderie at work and the support of our colleagues. And of course, this has all had a huge impact on our well-being and our mental health. So now, as we transition back to the workplace, we're sort of still dealing with this fallout, and we're trying to adjust to hybrid working. So in many cases with limited success. So if we compare the landscape sort of pre and post-pandemic, it's clear that our mental health has declined, and it has become a common everyday experience for the majority of people. So a Mindshare study conducted last year and then back in 2019 in the US collected responses from 1,500 full-time workers. It was a really interesting study because you had that snapshot from 2019 to compare to 2021. And they found there was a marked increase in those reporting at least one mental health condition. So 76% in 2021 versus just 59% in 2019. And then interestingly, the higher you get up in the organizations, the higher the rate. So 82% of executives reporting at least one mental health symptom. And then for the younger talent, so the Gen Zers and the millennials, 77% reporting that their productivity was negatively impacted by their mental health, and with 50% leaving their roles if they were not supported by their companies and their organizations. So I think really, Mandy, what this report is showing us is that mental health is everybody's problem. And I think the good news is if we tackle it in the workplace, we have a real opportunity to make some far-reaching positive impact for everybody.
That's very true. Thank you, Dee. Maybe you can talk to us a bit more about how mental health and the perception of it is evolving in the workplace, if at all, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, okay, I think everybody is aware that COVID has been an ultimate game changer for shining a spotlight on our collective health and obviously on our mental health as well. So we're seeing a shift in how organizations are now looking at their responsibility in providing that sort of psychological safety as opposed to like just health and safety for their employees. So I suppose for the first time, many employers are stepping in to support the overall health of their employees. But the evolution of mental health awareness is at different stages across different industries and different geographies. So while some companies, you know, who maybe were ahead of the curve and are further along on the journey, there's lots of companies that are just catching up with this. So I think the key to success in this area for organizations is to be more proactive rather than reactive. So companies who only provide, say, the odd wellbeing event or little or no training in this area are going to have limited impact. So the ones that are truly evolving are making wellbeing and mental health a strategic priority. So not only do these companies include all the usual benefits, say, for instance, the mental health training and ambassador programs or giving their staff mental health days, and enhanced apps like Panda, for instance, or EAP supports, but they go one step further. So the big thing is they're training their leaders in this area and holding them accountable for improving the work practices, such as flexible working hours, improved family-friendly policies like the menopause or surrogacy or fertility issues, along with a really robust D&I program. So I think that is really, really important. So the leaders in these more evolved companies are empowered to model this, you know, model the healthy behaviors, and this in turn will permeate down through the levels and will normalize these behaviors and these activities.
Thanks, Dee. I'm going to pick up on something you said there on proactive versus reactive kind of measures, and maybe you can also talk to us about the difference between mental fitness and mental health.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and it's becoming sort of much more popular now, the idea of mental fitness. But in a nutshell, I think the best way to describe it is that your mental health is about your being. It's like a state of being, and then your mental fitness is very much about doing. So the easiest way to look at it is if you apply the same question perhaps to your physical health and your physical fitness. So it's easier to imagine. So your health is a state of being, as I say, while your fitness is more about the how. So it does encourage that action. And also, you are the agent of change and you can take control in this instance. So in the case of mental fitness, you can focus your attention on how to exercise that mental muscle. So it could be through maybe addressing the major stresses in your life, or on healthy eating habits, or, you know, like a highly processed diet or a poor sleep hygiene, for instance. And by taking the time in your day to reconnect with people, and these will obviously be things that will enhance your mood and add value to your life. So
all very true. What about kind of, you know, the pandemic landed upon us, everyone went into working from home, and then all of a sudden things have been expected to kind of switch back to normal. So how do you view kind of that burden on people's mental health of now having to adjust back to office life?
So obviously it's a huge burden, and it continues to be a huge burden. So I think that's, you know, that's why there's so many people on the call here today to try and work it out and progress forward. So as we do transition back to the hybrid working pattern, respondents, for instance, in this Mindshare study reported that the forced return to the office was negatively impacting on their mental health. And the two top reasons they gave were the policies around in-person versus remote work. So that kind of conflict that's happening for employees. And then the lack of work-life balance or flexibility. So these are key things that are causing that stress and anxiety for people. And then the issues with hybrid working are only starting to emerge, as we know, and employees and employers have not really reached a consensus on what the best solution is. So therefore, the future of work is uncertain, and that in turn is contributing to our feelings of unease and anxiety. But I think in all of this, there is a silver lining. There is good news. So I think following this, upheaval and period of disruption, we have really a once in a generation opportunity to redesign our working lives so that our mental health is actually protected. So we could actually arrive at a framework that provides a more autonomous model that acknowledges that there isn't really a one size fits all. So you could just, as testament to those percentages that I told you about earlier. So when it comes to workplace wellbeing, there really is just lots of shapes and sizes.
They are indeed. And we have a lot of people on the call today who might be, I think, struggling themselves, or maybe even just noticing people around them that are struggling. Do you have some tips for how people can be there for their co-workers without kind of overstepping any boundaries?
I think this is a super important and really great question, because peer-to-peer support is a massive part of your working life, and even if it's virtual or hybrid or whatever the case may be. But I think many people are very scared to approach a colleague, or they see that somebody is struggling because they don't want to get it wrong. So I think above all, I think the important thing to remember in these instances is that you're just connecting with somebody on a very human level. Okay, so it might be a workplace employee or a colleague or whatever the case may be. And really the first step is just to show compassion. So equally, if they're going to disclose some issues to you that, could be difficult, just don't underestimate the power of listening in this case. So, just maybe suggest a coffee or a walk outside and reassure the people that, this is a conversation that's confidential. And then I think, just reminding them about the EAP services that are available, or if there isn't anything in the organization, maybe signpost those local services that are in your area. And I think the most important aspect of all of this is if someone has disclosed something, is to check in with them regularly. And, this can make a huge difference to somebody if they're going through a difficult time. So yeah, really super important question. So thanks, Mandy.
Thank you so much, Dee. I think, there's an age-old saying that says, be kind, you never know what battle someone's facing. And it's really true. I think for too long, people have been fighting the mental health battle on their own. And I'm glad that we're here today talking about it, and we have all of you sharing with us. So thank you. We have so many questions that we want to ask you, and we'll definitely come back to you during the roundtable. So thank you so much, Dee. It's now time to bring on our second speaker, Jonny Jacobs. Jonny is the FD of Starbucks, and alongside his FD role, he is incredibly busy being a tireless advocate for mental health across several forums. Jonny is a trustee of the Mental Health Foundation, the UK's leading mental health charity. He's a non-executive director of mental health at work. He's one of my favorite things to be, which is a one-year World Ambassador, and he's also a goalkeeper of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Jonny was unsurprisingly voted and recognized as the Young Chartered Accountant of the Year in 2017, and he plays a very key role in supporting CAWs and their mental health initiatives. So, Jonny, a big welcome to the show. Please let me know if I've left out anything from your very impressive bio, but we'd love to kind of kick off with you talking kind of through your journey as a mental health activist and advocate.
Thanks, Mandy. First of all, you're far too kind, and Dee, I just loved hearing you talk there. It feels like this panel discussion is going to get really interesting. So many great things that you mentioned. Thank you very much. And where to start? Sometimes people ask me, why is an accountant talking about mental health or mental fitness? And I think it's probably best if I just start with a bit of a personal story. So for those that don't know me, can understand me a little bit more, and I guess why I'm involved in this space. And some of it comes back to my childhood. I grew up in really challenging environments. I grew up in a working class family in Glasgow, and I was surrounded by mental ill health. And at the age of 13, my life changed forever, where, like many families up and down the country, my parents got divorced, but I ended up in a situation where I effectively was bringing myself up alone. And I got to the lowest of low place, and I couldn't talk to anybody, and I certainly felt a lot of shame. And there was nobody around to say, let's talk. And why? Because of stigma. It wasn't something that you spoke about back then, certainly not in a working class family in the west of Scotland. And in some respect, in some cases, it's not something that you talk about now. But looking back on it, there's no question that stigma stole my childhood. And there's no question that stigma means that I'm one phone call away from one of my friends, be told one of my friends might have taken their own life. And stigma steals. And that's why webinars like this and conversations like this are so important, so that we can try and break down the stigma. And for me, I think I found my purpose in business. A number of years ago, I was at Pladis, a global snacking business that owns the likes of McVitie's biscuits or cookies for some of you on the call, and Godiva chocolate. And we took a program that ended up having over 120 of the most amazing ambassadors, mental health and wellbeing ambassadors, that became a gold standard program that we signed the first ever social partnership with the McVitie's brand and mental health charity Mind. And we reached millions of people up and down the country. And one of my big learnings in terms of my own journey was language. You talked there actually about the difference between mental health and mental fitness. And I'll just pick up on that for a second, because I remember going around the exec team and saying, oh, should we do something on mental health? And the thing is, nobody's going to say, no, we don't do mental health. But when you ask for money, you might get a very different answer. And I remember sometimes I would say the words mental health, and I would literally feel the stigma just like land on the ground. Stigma. And then we looked deep inside the mission and values of the organization. And we decided that instead we'd call the program Positive Minds. And I remember going back around the same people and said, oh, should we do Positive Minds? And they went, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do Positive Minds. Here's some money. And language has been a key part of my journey in this story. And now at Starbucks, as many of you know, the global coffee company, I'm hugely privileged to be the sponsor of our wellbeing program across our Europe, Middle East and Africa region. And we have hundreds of ambassadors that are also trying to make a difference. It's amazing. And a couple of weeks ago in our UK stores, thousands of ambassadors wore the green mental health ribbon badge, which was amazing. Really saying we want to break the stigma. And a key part of what we're trying to do there is share stories. And there's that amazing saying that says, every time we share a story, we send a lifeboat of hope. And I really believe that our role could be to send more lifeboats, that vulnerability is our superpower. Maybe the role of accountants out there is to send more lifeboats. So I think now more than ever, our mental health is so important. And like I said, Dee articulated that incredibly well. So it's a real privilege for me to be working with ICAS, co-leading the mental fitness and business strategy. And I do think there's a massive role of accountants here to win hearts and minds, not just across the profession, but also within the organizations that they serve and the organizations they're part of. So hopefully me just sharing that in terms of stigma, language and stories, there are certainly three key parts of the journey of discovery that I've been on about mental health.
Thanks so much, Jonny. I mean, as your story so eloquently really tells us, that childhood experiences can really shape your adult mental health as well. So I guess a question I have for you is, what could we be doing better at an educational level to really reach young people who may be struggling?
Such an important point, because we have to drive awareness at a young age. I look back, and it wasn't until about 10 years ago, I won't tell you how old I was, about 10 years ago, that I did my first ever Insights personality profile. And I found out that I was certain colours. And then they would tell you, who you'd interact with well and some of the challenges. And I looked back on it and I thought, I now know why when I was 5 years old, I did not get on with Adam in the playground. Because it just made me think about my personality and who resonated with me and the challenges. And then I think, well, why don't we teach more about our personalities and more about our well-being and our mental well-being and our psychology at schools? And now we're seeing some governments lean into this in certain countries, and we're seeing charities also lean into this by providing education and mental health awareness, but not just mental ill health, just broader understanding of our own, who we are and our own psyche. I think it's fundamentally important. And it wasn't until I was at One Young World, by the way, that when I was sat there in Bogota and I was listening to these very well-known people share their stories about mental health. And I'm guessing that many of the millennials in that room and Gen Z in that room, it was the first time they'd heard it too. But it's Gen Z and millennials that's going to be our leaders of the future. So if they're not educated now, how are they going to make a difference? I think we have to get in early, and we have to educate early, because ultimately these will also be our leaders of the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And, I think Dee mentioned this earlier as well, that we need to start looking at our mental health the same way we would our physical health. And I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, why we believe mental health is still largely inaccessible, being stigma, costs, and people not really knowing how to enter the system in the same way they would for a physical ailment. So I'd love to hear from your perspective what you see in business as well, and why people aren't getting the help that they potentially need.
Yeah, I think there's two things there. So I think let's address that in two ways. So what's the barrier, and then how can we then help? Yeah. The barrier comes back to what I said at the start: stigma. It's interesting. If you go into Google and you Google the word finance, one of the first things that comes up is the FT. So, certainly in the UK, that's fair. So finance, you get FT. If you Google the word stigma, do you know the first thing that comes up when you Google the word stigma? And stigma, by the way, is a mark of disgrace. That's the definition. The first thing that comes up is mental health. There is so much stigma associated with mental health that even Google tells you that mental health has a stigma. It's the first thing that comes up. It's a mark of disgrace. And that tells you what we have to change. We've got to go over stigma. And I think talking about it and sharing stories can normalize it. And I do think the role of finance professionals has got a huge role to play in sharing those stories and setting those lifeboats. And why are CFOs important? Why is the accountant and finance community important to break down those barriers? Well, we hold the purse strings in organizations. We can open up investment. If we can understand it, we can hopefully help and start allocating more money into budgets. When you look at your health and safety budget, how much goes on health versus safety? Let's protect the budgets, and let's also ensure that we invest and we focus more. And as Dee also said, move it up to be a strategic priority within the organization.
I love that, Jonny. I couldn't agree more. And I think we'll bring you onto our team to start pitching Panda as well. But yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think the more that we share these kind of stories and normalize it, the better. From a policy perspective and a kind of a government intervention perspective, do you think that there's anything more that can be done to actually then protect the mentally ill?
Yeah, I think there's a few things there. I mean, across different countries, there'll be different views around mental and physical health. So I just talked to the UK for a second. Do we have parity between mental and physical health? And without getting too bogged down in the politics of it all, the World Health Organization says the cost of mental ill health is anything between $1 and $2 trillion, and it's the next big pandemic. And in the UK, mental ill health costs about 3 to 5% of GDP. Right? So it's massive. So from a policy perspective, how much should we be investing in things like national health services, but also in countries maybe where there isn't a national health service, but there's other health provisions? Do you have parity between mental and physical health, recognizing that mental ill health could be 3 to 5% of a country's GDP? So I think there's lots that you can do at a policy level. But also, what about corporate reporting and transparency? We've had gender pay gap reporting in recent years in different countries. If you look at it through that lens, even in the UK, for example, there's been supplier frameworks where we're putting in place transparency to protect suppliers. But what are we doing in terms of corporate reporting around protecting the mental health of colleagues? I think there's maybe something around looking at well-being within that governments and policy organizations may do in that space.
Thanks so much, Jonny. Again, so many more questions to ask you, and we're going to bring you back to the roundtable in a moment. It's now time to introduce our third speaker for the day, Ronan Dunne. Ronan is the strategic advisor to the CEO of Verizon, the leading US telecoms provider in the US. He's also a current board member of Yahoo Inc., formerly known as Verizon Media. He's the former executive VP and CEO of the Verizon Consumer Group and was responsible for providing telecommunication services to over 100 million customers, and also played a critical role in the rollout of their 5G network. Ronan has then played a very important role in setting up Mind Together, a cross-brand initiative between Verizon Media or Yahoo Inc., Kellogg's, Spotify, and Snap to aim to really destigmatize mental health in the workplace. Ronan, it's amazing to have you on the show. It goes without saying how important the work that you are doing is, and we're so appreciative to have really a leader of your caliber kind of leading the charge on mental health. So to kick us off, I'd love to hear a bit more about Mind Together, how it got started, and what you guys are up to.
So thank you, Mandy, and really just building on what we've heard from the other speakers. The recognition, and driven very much by a colleague of mine, Guru Garapan, running Yahoo at the time, was a real desire for a new coalition among brands, names that people would recognize to set a standard in supporting employee mental health. And essentially, the goal was to normalize mental health within corporate commitments and to create a scalable framework to better both support and recognize in today's workforce the realities of the challenges and stresses that employees were under, and truthfully to hold ourselves to a higher standard to our accountability and responsibilities. And like speakers have said, Jonny and Dee, before, there's a number of key things there. The recognition that it's enlightened self-interest for an employer to recognize that the massive productivity loss and inefficiency associated with a failure to manage mental fitness and health in their organizations. And critically, the social stigma that Jonny referred to, which, the American Psychiatric Association said 95% of employees who take time off for mental health issues cite some other reason rather than acknowledge what is actually the challenge that they're dealing with. So really the initiative for all of us as brands in Mind Together was to lead in awareness, developing a robust internal communications toolkit in partnership with coalition members and specialist advisors, an education system to implement a mental health learning program in the workforce, recognizing that many of us just don't know enough to be able to do as much as we would want to do to help and support and host more candid and open conversations supported by external experts and thought leaders in the mental health and wellness space. And as you say, partners like Kellogg's and Snap and others, and then the specialist support of Mind Together made of millions who are actually doing a lot of the advisory work for us. And last thing I would say is the place to start is to start with the data. And so what we did was commissioned a mental health matrix, which was a major global research study on mental health in the workplace, and using that to introduce a new model for identifying the sources of strain and stress that were in the workplace and a better understanding of that. And by doing that, then empowering managers to better address the identifiable sources of stress and strain in the environment. So you're dealing with symptoms and cause rather than just one instead of the other.
Awesome. That, goes without saying, very important work, and look forward to you guys leading the charge for many to follow. I know Verizon took a decision to let people continue working remotely. Can you talk to us a bit about the link mental health had in that decision making?
Sure. And again, Mandy, to be clear, different parts of the organization, we've adopted different approaches. But one of the things that we identified right up front at the beginning of the pandemic was that if there was going to be a change in the work environment, it wasn't simply where work gets done, which in truth has been a lot of the focus as we think about return to the office environment. But the truth is we need to think about what work gets done and how work gets done. And really, when you've asked those two questions, then you can properly address where work gets done. So we've tried to look at it holistically in all of those areas. and identify the conditions that would need to prevail for people to be as successful in a remote or homework environment as they would have been if they were back in the office environment. And when I say successful, I mean productive, I mean work-life balance, I mean career development, training, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just one aspect. You have to look holistically at all. And one of the things we did right at the beginning of the pandemic, an organization of our size has the privilege of doing it, and I recognize not every organization is in the same situation, but we made it crystal clear that we would furlough nobody. And so the first uncertainty that was adding to the stress of, will I have a job? We addressed that right up front to everybody in the organization, 130,000 people. The second thing is, my home environment has been dramatically changed, either by homeschooling or responsibility for dependents, in adult dependents or others. So we expanded dramatically our parental support and care in the home support and childcare, etc. So what we tried to do was address those incremental sources of stress and strain that were specifically brought on by the pandemic. And that allowed us to get back to where I started, which is, okay, what work needs to get done? How does it best get done? And therefore set up people for success about where it could be done. And so for our call center employees, 17,000 of them went home when the pandemic started, and we created the conditions for them that they could continue to work and give them the certainty. The other thing that has allowed us to do, which I think is important, is to actively address elements of the work-life balance that have been a concern for some people in the return to office environment, having developed caring and coping mechanisms that actually were assisted by being closer to home. So I think we're all in a similar situation in that the nature of work is evolving, and not just where it gets done, but what work gets done and how it gets done. And if we think about all those things together, I think we can reduce the inherent strain, stress, and, if I may be so bold, the conflict of the perceived work-life balance. It's not that everything will be eliminated, but I think we can make material strides forward so that we're thinking about the whole individual, not just the piece of them that represents the worker between the hours of 8 and 6.
That's so interesting. And I'm actually going to pick up on something that you just said, where you actually look at a person as a whole now. And I think COVID-19 has forced us kind of into a space where we just actually know the people that we work with so much better. Do you think that society is moving towards being more empathetic and understanding of that person as a whole?
So I would love to be able to say an unequivocal yes. I would say that many of us have moved along on a journey, but I think there are still roadblocks. And to go back to how Jonny so eloquently shared earlier, is there are multiple stigmas. And in fact, there are even stigmas now about people who have decided to stay working from home versus those who believe. And we see it, we read it in the financial journals about CEOs who are saying, the people who are serious about their careers are in the office Monday to Friday. I'm not sure what the rest of the people are doing. So we've created new sets of challenges, but without Mandy sounding too generic, I have a philosophy which has grown from my years of engagement with One Young World, in that most of the challenges we have in society are all encompassed around one core element, which is that talent is broadly distributed in society. It's opportunity that isn't. And I think in any of these challenges, whether it's redefining the work environment, whether it's redefining the empathy of our society, is the big opportunity we have is better match the talent to the opportunities. The problem is not that we don't have the talent and the tools and the solutions to address the issues. It's that society in its structures is actually inflexible in bringing those talents to bear in addressing the solutions. And if I had one call out, it is that the next generation of technology, the sort of 5G that I'm passionately excited about, needs to be in the service of the individual, not the individual in the service of the technology. If we start to do that, then I think we create the conditions for mental fitness and well-being for everybody.
That's a great call out. And I'm going to ask you for one more call to action, and that is for business leaders out there, really. What would you ask business leaders to be doing to really move the needle on mental health?
So I would make two pleas. The first is I, as an accountant, see this very clearly. It's enlightened self-interest to improve the productivity, sustainability, performance, and efficiency of your business. Failing to address mental health means that you are trying to compete in the current world with one hand tied behind your back. The second thing is that real diversity in the workforce is probably the greatest tool that you can have. And a positive approach to diversity in its broadest sense means that disability, mental health, neurodiversity, and other things are things that you need to address and embrace so that you bring the best possible talent and capability to bear to deliver the best outcomes, both for your employees, your shareholders, your customers. That way you have a balanced scorecard of stakeholders, and you actually build a better business.
Thank you so much, Ronan. And I hope everyone out there who's posting on social media is going to remember to add these key takeaways and hashtag difference makers. Ronan, we're going to bring you back in a moment to the roundtable. And before we head there, we just have one more poll that we want to run, which really picks up on what we've been discussing, and we'll take it into the roundtable. But we want to ask all of you whether you feel that your company or your organization take their employees' mental wellness into account. And the options are, yes, they do, no, they don't, or only at a superficial level, and it could use some improvement. So please head on over to the poll, and we'd love to see your answers. So going into the roundtable ahead of that poll, I think, I've said it before on the call, but it really is such a privilege to have the three of you here just talking openly and honestly with us and bringing this conversation to the floor. So I'm going to kick off the roundtable by just asking each of you, starting with you, Dee, what do you do to invest in your mental health? And then Jonny and Ronan, if you can pick up after Dee, that'll be great.
Thanks, Mandy. Well, I'm a bit of a social animal, so I like to I found code very difficult, being kind of locked away for years and years, it felt like. So I think connecting with others for me is a really key protector for my mental health. So I like to kind of get out and, I find laughter and conversation and sharing stories and problems with friends and families really gives me that kind of boost to my mental health. And then on the flip side, it's kind of knowing when to sort of disconnect either from work or from friends when the social battery might be a bit depleted. So taking time out in nature or just getting stuck into a good book, those are the kind of things that I like to do. Thanks.
How about you, Jonny?
Thanks. I often just talk about trying to get the fundamentals right in terms of eat well, sleep well, and drink well. So not too much alcohol, try and drink water, try and eat well, etc. And then exercise in whatever way you're suitable for your body. For me, I try and go on the bike once a week, and my biggest boost to my mental health is actually playing tennis. I'm not very good, by the way, but when I'm on that court, I just have this like moment of mindfulness, and that's what I found. And if I just play tennis, it sets me up for the week. And then three other things I also focus on is kindness. I honestly find that if you focus on trying to be kind, it really does help your well-being, and also helps the other person as well, which is great. And Dee touched on nature as well. And the last one is trying to show as much empathy for others. Again, really helps me and my mental health.
Thanks for sharing, Jonny. How about you, Ronan?
So I maybe blend some of those. I made the decision at the beginning of the pandemic. I've been blessed with a pretty robust mental health all my life and a natural extrovert character, which might surprise some people. But I took the decision at the beginning of the pandemic to proactively reach out and started in the first weeks of the pandemic with 5 a week, and then progressively moved on from there, just in the idea that for a lot of people, the thing that was missing in the pandemic was hello, was hi, was. So I just reached out to a lot of people that I hadn't been in touch with on a regular basis, plus some people in the work environment who, because of the change in circumstances, I wouldn't. And what I would say, Mandy, is, and this is striking the balance between, we all have something to input, because the beauty of life, society, everything is we're all different. And actually very often what we have is what other people need. That's the beauty of it. And so that opportunity to reach out, and in my experience, about 99% of the reach outs, and some of them were by text, some of them were a call, some of them were an email, different things. About 99% of them were responded to, and about 95% were responded to within a really short space of time. People needed. And again, not to make a point for the sake of it is, but as somebody who believes in brand and marketing, the greatest failure of the pandemic was the misbranding of social distancing. We didn't need social distancing. We needed physical distancing while maintaining social intimacy. And we actually forced ourselves into a situation where we created greater separation in a societal mental way than actually was necessary, and we're paying the price for that now. The second thing for me that I enjoy doing is I'm learning a little bit around yoga and Pilates and things like that. And actually, the former CEO at Verizon Media, Yahoo, Guru Garapan, started to have those mental well-being days every Friday, and brought in various yogi and others to help us to start to think about and just to familiarize ourselves with different mindset approaches that perhaps some of us were less used to. And a bit like Jonny, I find sport or activity or other things to be an escape, not because I'm good at it, but because I get healthily distracted by it.
Thank you all for sharing. I'm going to go back to the poll now because the results are in, and I'll tell you now, 36% of people said that their companies do take mental well-being seriously, but the rest all said either no or only at a superficial level, and that's still a giant gap to be filled. So my question to you guys is really, how do we also start moving the needle on company culture, how they see mental health? And looping in Jonny's point earlier, you know, the more data we have and the more we can actually pull on the purse strings, that's great. But for now, we actually need to change the mindset from a checkbox approach to actually having solutions that work for our employees. Jonny, I'm going to start with you for any tips you may have.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. I could go in different directions, but maybe I'll just go with something practical. When I work with organizations on creating mental well-being and wider well-being programs, we always think about how can you try and shift the culture, and how can you gain momentum and create a movement. And I think we try and do that with three key components when trying to shift the culture. And this is also, for example, the route that we're taking at Starbucks. We have an amazing culture, an amazing group of people. And the first is making sure that any program is grassroots. It's making sure that those individuals that want to drive the cultural change, you give the space and the ability to do that. And when you do that, honestly, the amount of people that put themselves forward and you harness that energy, it's brilliant. The second thing is making sure that you include all functions in any cultural change. And because if you want to drive, let's say, change in a wellbeing program and wellbeing more broadly, they need to have people in different parts of the business and functions all working towards it. Otherwise, you might not get things done. I think the third thing is making sure that you have the right advocacy and buy-in across all levels, right from the tone from the top. And it sounded like, for example, Ronan there's got a great tone from the top, where he is, for example, but having that tone from the top and giving you permission and making you feel safe to be able to change the culture is important. But it's not just the top, it's right the way through the organization.
Mandy, can I just build on one of Jonny's comments, because I think it's so important. If you were to take the survey that we just did, and I know it's not a statistical survey, but one of the insights in surveys is that when people are asked about the company, their opinion is formed in most parts by the person that they report to, because that person represents the company. And I think what's really important, and it was to Jonny's point of tone from the top gives permission, but the delivery of the space that people need is determined by their supervisor, by their manager. And that's where the criticality is, because it's a bit like, forgive me, but when we all started to look at things like unconscious bias, we started in boardrooms and other things, and don't get me wrong, great. But we started at the top and said, oh, now we understand and we'll change our language, et cetera, et cetera. The reality of whether the change happens is the one-to-one relationship you have when you walk into the retail store. That's the key. And that's where what we need to do is we need to ensure that we have a common narrative that is clear from the top down, and use that narrative to create context. And this isn't just about mental health. This, if I may be so bold, is a replicable formula for successful and effective communications in organizations. Is if you have a common context where people understand what the big ambition of the organization is, but also understand how it affects them at their level in the organization, what you actually do is give them confidence to exercise their judgment. And we know that the best outcome for any challenge in a business is one that's taken and given effect to closest to the situation at hand, whether that be an employee situation or whether that be a customer situation. So what I would say is the challenge that we have is, if there's one store in 1,000, if there is one warehouse in 100, if there's one, employee canteen in 50, where this doesn't exist, well, then it doesn't exist for those employees. And that's why we just have to be relentless on making sure that every part of the organization understands the challenge and is given the support necessary to give those leaders, those supervisors, managers, the confidence to have the courageous conversation, to put an arm around somebody and say, is everything okay?
Thank you, Ronan. So true. So we've spoken, I guess, about the support from within the organizations now. And Dee, I'm going to cross over to you and maybe put you on the spot a bit to ask you really, if you had a call to action for member institutes and how they can better support their members from a mental health perspective, what would it be?
Yeah, great question. I think, as we've heard here today, lots of fantastic sort of insights and all the rest of it. And we know from the research that basically the mental health, it's affecting everybody. So this is not something that's kind of siloed over in a corner. So I think it's the majority of the Institute staff, and it's the majority of their members and their students that are actually suffering and maybe actually, having these challenges. And I think with this in mind, our institutes really need to kind of join the charge and challenge the stigma that we've been talking about here today, and become those advocates in raising awareness around the mental health issues. I think the key thing here is about education and training their staff for those soft skills that Ronan was alluding to there, to understand the issues surrounding mental health. So it's really, really important. The education is a key component of this. And then provide a wellbeing section, really practical, providing a wellbeing section on their websites with signposting to the supports that are available in their respective regions. This could be actually the first port of call that somebody that's actually struggling, they might go to their institute looking for this information. And then just lastly, as the chair of the mental fitness task force, come and support us, maybe make sure that there's one of your representatives around the table. And this is where we're sharing best practice, what's going on in the regions. We learn a ton from each other and we support each other in this, kind of initiative. So it's really, really a great place to be for people to come forward. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Dee. I agree that task force really is incredible. And thank you so much for forming it and just charging the lead within the institutes. We are going to head over to questions from our audience in a moment. Just before we do, for the last 12 minutes, we'll have 12 minutes to go through audience questions, but we want to bring up a word cloud where you actually are going to share with us activities that you're doing currently to invest in your mental health. So please click on a couple of the words that resonate with you. And I'm going to start looking at some of these audience questions in the interim. We have lots of questions coming through. I can tell you there have been over 100 submitted between the pre-show and through the chat function. So I'm going to try to get a broad spread, I guess, globally and pick some out. I just want to check, speakers, are you ready? Are you ready to go? These are the hot seat questions. Okay, so we have a question coming through from Rensi in Indonesia asking how to maintain mental health in a stressful work environment. And I'm going to pull through another one coming through from Nigeria, asking how can chartered accountants maintain a work-life balance considering the digital age we live in and operate in, coupled with the ever increasing demand from work. So I think these kind of go together. You know, we're in high pressure environments, and at the same time, we're in environments that just don't switch off. So Jonny, I'm going to flip to you to kick us off with your thoughts on this one.
Thank you, Mandy, and thank you, Renzi. And I didn't catch the other person's name, but thank you very much for the questions. High pressure environment. You know, actually, just touching on what Ronan said earlier about line managers, and I think that's fundamentally important. And I just want to bring that in because there has been some research done for accountants and finance professionals specifically, and the vast majority, over 70-80% of participants, say that work is a key determinant of our mental health. Also, about 80% would say that they have been stressed at work. So we know that work is a key determinant of our mental health. We all basically say the work has stressed us the last 12 months. But the thing that really upsets me, the vast majority, over 70% of people say they will not talk to their line manager because they think it will be career limiting. So we know we're stressed at work, but we don't talk to a line manager because we think it's career limiting. And that's why we really have to get into that line manager population, which is fundamentally important. And the reason why I mention it is I think it's conversations with your line manager, which is really important to get to a good place so you have a good working environment that you can thrive. And one of the things, for example, that we're doing in some of the teams that I work with is having wellbeing objectives. So alongside your performance objectives, if you like, you have wellbeing objectives. And sometimes we talk about caring for yourself. So where are the areas where you can take time to show compassion? Where's the areas that you can be really active? Where's the areas where you want to build on your relationships? And where's the areas that you want to, do exercise? I think having those conversations about care or whatever works for you with your line manager in your well-being objectives and talking about your non-negotiables. For me, for example, I've got a new baby. I want to be the best bedtime story reader I can be. I talk about it with my line manager. That's what I want to do. That's what's going to help my well-being. That's my non-negotiable. I want to do that. And I think that's important. So having that really open dialogue with your line manager to the extent you can. I totally get all cultures are different and that's not possible. But I think having the conversations, thinking about well-being and taking ownership and accountability, I think is important.
Thank you, Jonny. I love that. And I have no doubt that you are the best storyteller. So I'm sure your little one's very lucky to have you. The next question actually links to parenting as well. And Ronan, since I know that you have a daughter in her 20s, I'm going to send this one your way. And I don't think it's an easy one, but Paul from the UK has asked, are there any thoughts on being present for family, your partner and your children while pushing forward in a high pressure environment and maintaining your mental health? Does one have to come at the sacrifice of another?
So, Mandy, thanks for the question. I have very strong views on this, and these aren't views that were formed over the pandemic. I think the nature of work and the nature of careers, in my view, has to be founded on mutual respect and mutual understanding. And if you genuinely believe that a workplace should be an inviting place in which somebody can bring their best self every single day, that person, by definition, is a son, a daughter, a mother, a brother, a sister, an aunt. And they don't park that in reception when they arrive into the building. And I've always believed, and I've had the privilege of being a senior executive in my later years, but everybody starts at the beginning and starts their career somewhere. In my case, flipping hamburgers in McDonald's in Dublin. But the point is that the authenticity of bringing yourself at every level, I actually believe, affords you the opportunity to not make false compromises. There will always be a question that says, but we still need two people to stay late tonight, and therefore we have to have a conversation about who that might be. I'm not naive. But an awful lot of people, in exactly the same way as we had the conversation about mental health earlier, default to, I won't say, I won't ask, and therefore I'll blame the situation. My daughter happened to be an exceptionally talented field hockey player, and I only missed one competitive game in 8 years. She can tell you exactly which game it was, on what day, and I still feel guilty about that because that was on a Sunday. But guess what? I showed up for the other 300. So I would say, don't make a crisis when there isn't one. Be open, be willing to have a conversation. And if I may be so bold, I'll take it back to the very beginning when we introduced ourselves. Jonny showed vulnerability and authenticity as a leader. And I bet you that he went up in people's estimation as a result. In my experience, vulnerability and authenticity are strengths, not weaknesses. And there is no authenticity without vulnerability. Now, it's easy for some of us who are a little older and more seasoned perhaps to say it, but it's true. And I've never found authenticity or vulnerability rejected in any environment I've been in. So ask the question, celebrate the fact that you're a new parent, that you have a sports day, that you have a something else, and be planful and purposeful. And if you are, a lot of these realities may actually work out just the way you want them.
Thank you, Ronan. As a parent of 2 young kids myself, that is very inspiring to hear. So thank you so much for sharing. Dee, I'm going to direct the next question to you because I know that a lot of your work has really revolved around understanding anxiety in the workplace in specific. So we have a question coming from somebody in Zambia who has asked, how do I know as a finance professional whether I am mentally stressed? How much time should I take for myself? And how do I create the space for it?
Well, that's a really vulnerable question. So we're talking about vulnerability here. So thank you for that. I don't have the name, but and it's actually a very common question. This is something that comes up time and time again. You know, how do I know that I'm stressed? You know, so look, you know, mental stress and anxiety are very hard to identify in the moment that you're experiencing it. So the main reason for this is we all know when you're anxious, your body responds automatically. So you're producing the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, and you have an amygdala takeover. So this is your primitive brain, not your thinking brain. So you're not really thinking very rationally. So ultimately, you're kind of running on autopilot through a stressful situation or a stressful time. And like, that's actually okay if it just happens every once in a while. So I think the issue is really when the stress becomes like a daily occurrence, like a sort of a drip situation. And then you have this kind of flood of stress hormones that can obviously take its toll. So then, you know, the net result there is that you're going to lose concentration and motivation. You're going to feel fatigued, and ultimately, you know, it's going to start affecting your physical health as well. So this could be going on for this person. So obviously, you know, how do we kind of, you know, tackle this? That goes without saying. But the best way really is to kind of remove the stressors. So we have had, all of us, lots of macro stressors, you know, with the pandemic and wars and all sorts of, you know, climate crises going around the world. But, you know, I think if you can take it down to an individual level, looking sort of, you know, we're all kind of in a kind of a finance frame of mind, doing an audit on your own daily workload and your routines and those relationships that you have in your life is really important. It's a really great first step. So you're going to identify maybe the big stressors that are going on for you and take action. So we're talking here today about speaking up, maybe speaking to a colleague or your line manager, of course, if you're brave enough, and hopefully you are, or it could be like just a family member. So you're kind of taking back control of a situation that you may feel very overwhelmed in. So this is when you're going to start seeing some changes. So I hope that's answered a little bit of that person's question. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Dee. We only have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to pull out one question which I think is pretty important. It's coming from Sarani in Sri Lanka, who has asked what best practices you have to keep track of your mental health. And I think that's a big thing, because physical health, we know we can get on the scale, we can measure inches, but mental health can be much more complicated. So I'm going to ask each of you to just share your quick tip on measuring mental health in your own life. Dee, you can kick us off first.
I think the quickest one, the one that everyone can take away with, is just disconnect from your device, you know, way more than you want to. And I think we're all sort of tethered to our devices so often. So just, you know, put the device away, disconnect, get out in nature, as we're all saying, you know, go and read that book, talk to that friend, you know, do a bit of socializing, or just, you know, a bit of self-care. So yeah, definitely number one tip for me.
How about you, Jonny?
Yeah, I would go down a similar route to Dee. I think it's working out what works for you, and then you track it. So for me personally, getting out walking is my thing. I take a lot of walking meetings, and I'm very deliberate. And I say to people, can I do this at a walking meeting? And I try and empower other people as well to then, if they want to go and get their walking shoes on, we could do a walking meeting. So actually for me, a track of my mental health is how many steps have I done? And if I get over 15,000 steps, chances are my mental health is going to be in a decent place that day.
Love that, Jonny. Thank you. Ronan, what's your tip for the day?
Well, I'm definitely with Jonny, having done walking meetings earlier today. Very much that is about that physical well-being, but also the external stimulus is big. The other thing that I personally love to do, and I'm lucky enough I have a bit more time in my life these days, is I get energized and regenerated by reaching out. So I'm doing a lot more coaching and mentoring. And I actually believe I get as much out as the mentee does as well, because it helps me to refresh for myself what are the things that are good and should be doing, and actually is as good a lesson for me and a refresher for me as it hopefully is for the other person. And I hugely enjoy it. I measure success by reference to whether or not I made a difference, and that helps me to reset my energy stores, even if it's a small difference. Every difference counts.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Ronan, and thank you to all of you for sharing your time and your thoughts today. To our audience, we hope that this discussion has really made you more comfortable to start the conversation about your mental health and the mental health of your peers and your friends around you, and that you walk away with some useful tips and practical tips to start your journey. We hope that we'll see you again in July for the next episode in the Difference Makers Discuss series. We'll be talking about trust and evolution. So please take a look out for more details, and we'll see you then.